And what else can I say other than we are joined today by Martin Barre, legendary guitarist and music creator, stage persona. Scott, do you want to introduce a little bit in greater detail, perhaps?
Well, legendary in my mind when it comes to Martin is an understatement. Um,
Yes, I would agree.
Whether the name sounds familiar to you or not, it should because he is the guitarist of Jethro Tull, and if you don't know who that is, you're living under a hole in the
That's true.
somewhere.
Yes.
So Martin, I think this is going to be a really great interview. I know now you're doing the or up until COVID, you were doing the tour dates for your anniversary, 50th anniversary tour of Tull's music, and I'm looking forward to hearing all about that. But welcome,
Yeah,
very much welcome to our first season, our first episode of the new season,
thank
and
you, thank
it's
you.
a real kick to.
Glad to start it off.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually you and I actually met a while ago, and you definitely would never remember this, but you guys played in Orange County, and I was doing some work for Doan at the time. I built a computer for him um, back in the day, and as a thank you, he gave me backstage passes to your show down there in Orange County, and it was
Oh,
hilarious because it was a theater that hosted things musicals like South Pacific and Oklahoma and all this, and I don't think they really knew how to embrace the Tull culture because the program when I got it, it had all this beautiful artwork for South Pacific with Robert Goulet and all this, and then in black and white down at the bottom, Jethro Tull. And it was really something. But we met backstage for a couple of minutes, and you just been kicking ass for about 2.5 hours, 3 hours on stage.
I
So
think it was the gig where I lost my hat, and it was a Kangol hat. I used to wear it back to front. Is that my hat?
I think it
Is that
might
my
be
hat?
actually. I think he stole your hat.
Yeah. Well, he might have
Mm.
found it and thought it.
maybe this one's it. It's my trademark. I wear it for all of my videos. So
He
No,
does.
I have a few of them upstairs. Yeah, in my
good man.
closet.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Martin. This is a real treat for me, and I think for I can speak for both of us that we're both really big fans of your music,
Yeah.
the contributions you've made to popular music over the last 50 plus years, and may you continue to contribute more great music for the years to come.
Ooh, it's a challenge. The challenges are there. We can talk about those as we go on, but
Yeah.
yeah, well, the difficult thing, you talk about the 50th anniversary, but of course it's now gone.
Yeah.
So
Right.
so the next project was an Aqualung anniversary tour,
Hmm.
but it looks like that's going to go as well. So that's 2021, but it's all it's all escaping. You know,
Mm-hmm.
time frames moving on, and without anything happening. So it's very weird.
It is. Have you found that being home for this long has given you a different perspective on music in general?
Um, no, I'm quite. Um, no, but my view on music, I'm quite reticent about liking music. I'm very opinionated,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, yeah, it's given me a big change of outlook on a personal level,
Hmm.
and just dealing with people and the values of people around me, and because I'm not around fans, I'm not around the business, I'm not around other musicians, which
Right.
in some ways is a sort of false world. Um, Not in a bad way, but it's like an actor would have an unreal world that he lives in because of
Mm-hmm.
fame. I'm not saying I'm famous, but I just think
You
it's not
should.
quite grounded. But now it's the really important values of family and people that you meet in the street and just spend 5 minutes chatting to, and you don't know who they are,
Right.
and they don't know who I am, but it's quite nice.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different set of values, and
Yeah.
I quite like it.
You mean you don't have droves of people in tie-dye t-shirts coming up to you and saying,
Not down here.
I almost wore one of my tie-dyes today to kick this
Oh,
episode off, but I figured you'd probably seen enough of that.
Wow.
But you know, I'm hoping that we can have a chat definitely about your tone, and how much that's changed over the years. You know, there are musicians who, in many ways, in their youth, sound better than they do as they age. And I would dare say that that's actually been quite the opposite for you. Not that you ever sounded bad, but the fact that you're now doing the solo act with the solo recordings, and you have a little more control over what's going on with the tone and the production. I've been really impressed with what I've heard. And
good.
It's been
Thank
really,
you.
really strong.
A bit of a two-way street, you know, because in some areas, I think there's improvements, as you say, in tone and just the sonic presentation of music. But then, you know, I'll listen to. I've got a house full of cassettes, reel-to-reel, DVDs, VHS. I mean, every format that ever existed. I have live tapes, hundreds of them, and I'll go and play something from the 90s, and I'm like, wow, I can't play like that anymore. It's I can't play as good, and I'm not as dexterous as I was then. And on the other hand, that last night I had somebody burnt a CD of a very early Tull rehearsal. Now there was two. One was a rehearsal for Passion Play. Now that was a real eye opener. I mean, that this is something I haven't heard for a long, long time. And then on the same tape was one of the first Tull gigs I ever did, which was in Stockholm in '69. And it's really terrible. It's really awful. The playing's just really horrible. But I mean, it was of the generation. And so in 1969, probably the standard in music and in bands was a whole different ballgame. So in comparison, it was probably okay. But now it just doesn't stand up at all. So there's all these sort of contrasts that you know, it's give and take. You go one step forward, one step back. So things move around, but not everything's better now than it used to be, and some things are a lot better.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, please go for it.
No, I was going to say, I was reading that, and correct me if I'm wrong, because all sorts of false information's on the internet, apparently, but I was reading that...
Get out of town.
Somebody...
I never knew that.
I thought it was all true. What do I know? I read somewhere that your favorite Jethro Tull album is or was Under Wraps.
Yeah, it is, just because it's quirky, and I, you know, I can't really, I can acknowledge the obvious tracks that are important, Aqualung, Locomotive Breath, yeah, and you know that they're so in front of me,
sure,
that I'm trying to look at what's behind it. So I quite like finding the tracks that people haven't heard a lot of.
Yeah.
Just songs that sort of slipped through the system and didn't become well known, but they're just as deserving. And certainly with Under Wraps, it got a bad name because it was all electronic drums and they sound terrible. But the songs were good.
That's the whole thing that I kind of wanted to ask you about, was the idea that I think there are a lot of artists that we've interviewed and that I've had the pleasure of working with, who we all feel like whenever you want to do something different, whenever you want to advance, there is that risk that people want you to stay as you are, right? Pardon?
Oh, sorry, I'm interrupting you.
No,
but
please.
Hand in hand with that is the risk that if you do the same thing, people
Right.
think it's repetition. So
Exactly.
you
Right.
you do an aqualung, The Return, 1972, and people are going to go, wow, you know, they haven't even put any effort. They're just trying to do the same thing again.
Right.
But the natural instinct for Tull and for me as a solo artist is to just move on,
Right.
and not for the sake of it, because it's a natural thing you want to do within music. Nobody wants to stand still,
Right.
and I don't want. I always want things to improve, and that probably to other people that they won't see an improvement. It's just a change, but I have to try and do something better to do a project, and not want it to be better than the one you finished last.
Certainly. Right.
Is impossible. It's I think you can't stand still in music, and people that do follow a formula, that they fall flat on their face at some point, because it's just that nobody wants to hear the same thing, regurgitated.
Right. Right.
Interestingly enough, that album, the live show of that album is it reappeared on YouTube.
Oh yeah.
A couple of years ago, and it was a pretty popular video for when it came out. I mean, there's been a few million views on it now, I think. And it really did. I got into you guys around a little light music, believe it or not. I mean, I knew Tull's music, obviously, but because of course I was one of those ones who was watching the Grammys all the way back there in the 80s, and when Metallica was the favorite and you guys won, it was like a complete shock to everybody. And Don and I have spoken at that ad nauseum. But Under Wraps was like, actually, in my mind, there are a lot of really good songs on the album. And it was more of a sign of the times more than anything, because it was very fashionable with synthesizer work. And
I think everybody was doing it, and nobody sort of looked beyond it. But when we played that music live with proper drums, a proper live band, it came alive. And I remember it being a great tour, with a lot of great playing and a lot of good music. I just think it's, maybe a project that would be worthwhile would be re-record it, or just get a drummer to play to those tracks and make it a bit more human. But yeah, we just had to go down that road and find out for ourselves what it was all about. So we sort of dipped our toe in the water and took it out again.
Plus, you got to burst out of that paper envelope you guys were in on stage. That was pretty cool at the beginning. So, an interesting thing happened when I announced the interview, because the press photo that your manager gave us was one with you holding a Strat.
Yeah.
And so many people wrote back and said, Martin plays a Les Paul.
Yeah, well.
And I was like, well, hey, Mr. Guitar Player, we have a right to switch between platforms, between axes. So what is the, do you have on day, off days with like various guitars? I mean, how do you make your choice for which one you're gonna play for the day?
Well, my studio's next door, and I have 1, 2, 3. I've probably got 4 guitars that I play all the time. One of them's a Fender Strat. One of them's a Gibson 335, a very nice one, an old one. And then I've got a Les Paul, and I have a Parker Fly.
Oh.
Now, which I think is one of the most underrated guitars on the planet. And that I just picked one up for no reason. I've got a nice choice, and I'm sport for choice. But yeah, I'm not tied down to doing any one thing. And when you look at Jeff Beck, started on Les Pauls and went to Strats, but you can't think of Jeff Beck not playing a Strat.
Right.
But he did for a long time. And then Dave Gilmour his solo on the wall, it just screams Strat, but it was a Les Paul. So you know that there's no rules, and essentially the sound and the feel of music comes. It's a physical thing. It's not a piece of wood and metal that you pick up and you become it. It becomes you. It's the other way around. So I just think whatever produces a sound starts inside of the person and travels through the fingers and the arms and the wrists and the pressure and the attitude and the creativity, or not if it's not there. It's a complex beast, and you can't pin it down to a guitar on an amp.
So let me ask you this question then, because what you're saying, I think, rings true with a lot of people, but we do encounter from time to time small factions of people that feel like they have to be, for some reason, married to the gear, and that the gear is the thing that creates the sound, and it's not the person that creates the sound. So they're in effect sort of backwards engineering their creativity, and they can't seem to get out of it. They seem quite fervently committed to this line of thinking. What could you say to maybe help augment their process in that?
Easy. They're wrong.
You heard it here, folks. You're wrong.
Shall I explain why?
Yes, please. Very much so.
In 1967, I did a session in London with a bunch of guys for a girl singer. She was a very pretty young girl, and it was written by one of the Animals, you know, the band. So we were doing the backing track, and but while we're finishing off, into the studio walks Jeff Beck, which would, you know, by coincidence we were just talking about him. So we're all like going, "Oh my God, it's Jeff Beck!" And of course, we were nobodies. So essentially, he went into the control room with this very pretty girl singer, listening to all the playback, and she obviously asked him to put a solo on her song, and I think because he found her quite attractive. The opposite. I don't know. This is all hearsay. The conversation. I'm presuming this is what happened. So he comes out in the studio, says, "Anybody got a guitar?" And we're all like, "Well, no, I've got mine." He said, "No, I didn't." He didn't like mine. There was an old guitar in a corner. He said, "Right, that'll do, and I need an amp." And he's sort of looking around, and again, in another corner, there was this sort of horrible, cheap, nasty amp falling to bits. He plugged the guitar and the amp, and it was Jeff Beck. So that was a lesson I learned a long time ago. So Jeff Beck sounds like Jeff Beck, whatever he plays.
That's a very good lesson indeed. Absolutely.
True enough.
Absolutely.
So let's. I want to ask you a couple questions about your amp setup, because you're definitely a Soldano guy, at least for quite a long time. How has your amp setup sort of morphed and evolved as we've gone along here? Because you were mostly a Marshall guy before, right? Or
yeah. I started with high watts. And then when we started coming to the States, the high watts, because they're built in England and they weren't meant to run on a transformer, so they just blew up all the time. You know, big stadium gigs that they every night something would go wrong, and then Marshalls somehow overcame that problem. So you know, that they sounded good, but they were fairly reliable. So we all went over to Marshalls for quite a few years, but they weren't completely reliable, and they all sounded different. And I used to go to Marshall, to the factory, and say, "Look, I love the sound of this amp. Can you build me another 10?" You know, because I wanted that many on the road, and they couldn't do it. I said, well, why not? And essentially, they had no idea why that there was this difference between different amps. I guess because they were virtually hand built, but they had no control, quality control at all. So one amp would be awful and another one would be incredible. Soldano changed that because the amp sounds great. You know, I started playing them 30 years ago, that they sound great and they all sound the same, and they don't go wrong. They travel around the world, that they get thrown around, and they're incredibly reliable. So the controls are all set, you know, the way I like it, and I might sort of change it a millimeter from year to year. But essentially, my amp, I could. It takes me a minute to set it up, and I plug in and I know what it's going to sound like. So that there's no. I quite like the fact that you've got something that's involved with your day-to-day gigging that you don't have to think about at all. And so, you know, you haven't got to worry about the amp doing what you want it to do. It's a done deal. And if anything, I play quieter and I back off the front end of the distortion. And I tend not to use it's a decatone, so I don't use the clean channel, and I don't use the overdrive channel. I just use, you know, what they call a crunch channel, and it's set so that when I back off the volume on a guitar, I get a clean sound. When I wind on the volume, it builds up the front end of the amp. So
it really responds dynamically then.
It's totally response to dynamics. It's which I love. You know, I love the fact you can just make a tiny adjustment on the guitar and it changes everything, or just play different. You know, you can be loud, but you just back off on the intensity of your left and right hand, which is what Jeff Beck does, and it produces a different sound. But you know, as we were talking about earlier, essentially you have to be in control of what comes out the amp, and the amp has to be the constant.
Well, I have to say one of my favorite live tones from the live albums I've heard, and I watched the YouTube video, and unfortunately I couldn't see anything as far as the setup went. But one of my favorite ones was A Little Light Music, that tour. It wasn't a particularly heavy tone, except for like Locomotive Breath, but because it would have, I guess it went against the theme of what you guys were trying to do on that tour. But you had plenty of bite in the electrics for sure. And then with the acoustic, my drummer at the time said, okay, you got to listen to this album because this guy kicks ass on acoustic guitar. And he was talking about you. And which then, you know, led me to my fascination with Jethro Tull. That was actually one of my favorite tones because that was really built on dynamics in a really big way. Because when you're playing acoustic rock, you know, in stadiums and all that, and auditoriums, there's a big challenge there, isn't there?
Yeah, well, the worst thing is to have to turn up full because you've lost control straight away. And the Little Light Music, funnily enough, was a Marshall, but it was a little tiny Marshall 15.
Oh, right on.
And all of Crest of a Knave, Under Wraps was all recorded on this little Studio 15. And I like the sound so much that on stage I used to run 6 of them, you know, or linked together, different parts of the stage. And they were loud, you know, 15 watts, they were very loud. But that was the amp I took to Marshall and I said, make me 100-watt version of that. And they couldn't do it. They said, no, we can't do that. I just said, why not? Essentially because they didn't know what they were doing. And this is a long time ago. I'm sure they know what they're doing now, but they really had no idea why that sounded great and another one didn't. But it was again, because it was a small amp and we had a very quiet stage setup, it was, you could really go from 0 to full and be in control all the way through that dynamic range.
So when you are working with an amplifier company, for example, since that's what we're sort of talking about right now, how involved are you? Like we've had guests on who are sort of in the factory on a weekly basis, on the phone with them every day,
Oh,
giving them
really?
schematics and so on and so forth.
Yeah. I'm the opposite. Zero.
Really?
That come straight out the cardboard box,
Nice.
and that's the end of it. That they don't. Their life doesn't change from
Mm.
out the cardboard box. So I have no. I know Mike Soldano, who's retired now, but and a few little things. I'd call him up to ask him advice, but essentially that I never ever had a problem with them. I never had any elements about that setup that I didn't like, and you just fine tune it to what you want.
Right.
But it's not. I've got a little Laney combo that I read a review on in Guitarist about 2 months ago, and it sounded great. And I'm always looking for an amp that when I get a local gig, I can put it in the back of the car, and and carry it. Soldanos they weigh a lot, and you've got a separate cab. So I got one on spec, and it sounds amazing. It sounds amazing. And I play it every day. I haven't played my Soldanos for about 2 months.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it's loud. I played it through a big cabinet. I played it through its own combo cabinet, a 1x12. It's and I've tried so many small amps and hated them because they just sound small.
Yeah.
They sound compressed. They don't have the dynamic range that the big amp heads do. So the book's not closed, and I never want to be somebody who is pig-headed. I use this guitar, that amp, and I'm not going to change. Nothing's going to change me. No, I'm always looking, and I'm ready to try things. And yeah, otherwise it was stupid. But why wouldn't you?
Well, that comes back to the whole growing and moving forward in music, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Especially with, the thing that got me with the whole under wraps thing, not to go back to that, was the idea that well, no, because this is about what? Why are you laughing?
Oh, no. It's
yes. Why are you laughing?
Why are you laughing, Scott?
It's on my iPhone. I listen to it on a pretty regular
Okay, so I'm just saying, man. Like, hold on a second.
Oh, it's all good.
Having a serious conversation here.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
No, the idea, I understand, like the idea of the drum machine at that time was still so okay. So I'm just slightly Scott's junior in terms of age, just maybe by a week and a half.
Yeah.
But what got me with that was, I think, the same thing that got me when jtull.com came out. It was this, because it was such a, I thought it was an exciting departure, and I don't like the word departure. I like the word augmentation, right? Like, as an artist, you have your core character, your personality, but you should go out and do and experience and grow and sort of be malleable. And then there are people that just are not willing to allow that into their own listening experience. And so, and I found a lot of that had to do with the technology behind it. Like, they were really panning the drum machine. And then with jtull.com, there was a couple of things that I read that were all about, I don't know, the recording process in it. And I just thought, how did we get to a place where people judge the quality of a creation on the basis of gear that they're not using?
Yeah, well, the thread was always there, and the thread's in the music writing and the arranging, because it's the same people doing it.
Right.
Essentially me and Ian.
Yeah.
And probably Doan to a degree as well, and the keyboard. I mean, the band contributing all the way along the line. So the thread runs through from the first album let's say, stand up, first one I was involved with, all the way through to the end.
Right.
There's a common thread, but it's like a snake. It moves. And it moves through technology or through fashion or the way you feel or what you want to do with your life,
Right.
the way you live. And that's the change has kept us, I think, thriving, because people don't know what to expect. And I love it where people really don't know what you're going to do next, because to me, that's exciting. You know, I don't want to go to a gig particularly and know exactly what I'm going to hear. I want to be surprised. I mean, I want some things that aren't a surprise. But so for .com, there was a lot of sampling,
Right.
and that was another phase which I didn't think was successful, because with sampling, like riffs, would sample chords, riffs, put them into the computer, and it was a novelty because it uses a different dynamic and feel to the end product. But essentially, you end up sat staring at a screen instead of playing music,
right,
and experimenting. You're glued to a computer screen, mesmerized.
Yeah.
And it's almost a lazy way of working, because it just takes it takes things that are off the wall out the equation. You know, it sort of sanitizes everything.
Yeah, it's quite
and
dispassionate, I think.
and sometimes, you know, you want a burp or a fart or a groan or a grunge. You know, in the whole process, nothing's perfect. You know, you listen to Julian Bream play classical guitar, and there aren't any farts, but there's squeaks and he's like sniffing, like
Right.
and it's beautiful, because you can almost see him in the room with you, because you hear everything about him. It's not just the note of the guitar, and when you remove all those elements from music, it just becomes very one-dimensional. So I hated that process, and I won't go near it. So computers to me are just a recording machine, and I don't paste and copy, and I don't fix things. Pitch, you know, I won't do it, because it's mentally lazy, and it's very constricting in your whole approach to music. I think music is live all the time.
You know, it's interesting. You talk about the extra little nuances going on in the background. When the Steven Wilson remixes started coming out, especially Aqualung. Now, personally, Stand Up is my favorite album of the catalog. I love the blues rock part of Tull's history. But when I heard Aqualung for the first time, the Steven Wilson remix, the drums all of a sudden came alive. Like there was a whole new snare drum. It was almost like he did drum replacement, which he didn't, but he just took the master tapes and he put them through new processors, and brought some new stuff out. And it's pretty crazy, especially when, you know, you're starting to use some of the really nice audiophile stuff like Miko uses. You get to hear some of those piano pedals and breaths between notes and all the little extra things you couldn't hear before.
Yeah, I mean,
so it's really a treat to be able to.
That's the other end of the equation, because you know, you've got the raw material, but you're sort of decluttering it, and you sort of disassembling it and putting it back together again in a better way, which is where you know, that's the good side of what we have to work within with technology. But it hasn't been re-recorded, and it's not replaced. That's essential. But he's still, what you hear was what was in the studio and what was put on tape. But but that's the opposite end of the spectrum.
It was amazing though, because, you know, a lot of the legacy acts will just keep doing remaster after remaster after remaster, and it's like, how many times can one buy I don't know, the Black Sabbath catalog or something like that,
Yeah,
I don't know why they're coming to mind, but with the Steven Wilson stuff, it was like, no, it's not a remaster, it's a remix. So it's like a new imagining of these classic tracks.
Yeah,
That
no, I agree
totally
with you.
blew my mind.
Yeah, I know. I like the concept of doing it, and then they've been repackaged to make them special as well. So
Sure.
when you spend money on it, you get something that in my mind says it's worth what you pay for it, sonically and visually. Yeah, it's. I got lost what I was about to talk about. But yeah, I know what it was. That I hate the idea where you repackage stuff for the sake of it, and that's why I did the 50th anniversary record, because traditionally record labels will find an excuse to repackage some old tracks as they were, just pluck them off the original mix,
Right.
put them in a new cover and sell them. It's deplorable. So I've re-recorded everything. So it was all completely fresh. The idea of a best of album, I better be careful because I might do one, but I hope not. I don't like the idea. Once it's recorded and in a package, it's finished. It doesn't need to be put in a new package.
Right.
With some other stuff. It's cheap. It's a cheap shot to me. So if you do an album that celebrates, let's say, Aqualung, it's 50 years of Aqualung, my band could re-record the whole of Aqualung live in a theatre, which is good, but that makes it viable. But it's got to have there needs to be a very good reason behind it.
Sure.
I'm not saying very well, but
so speaking of repackaging and being viable, I'm sure you have come across, because I sure as heck have come across people covering your music on YouTube. Some do them justice, some do grave and grievous injustices. And some have very interesting, unique interpretations. Like they want to not just cover it, but they want to reimagine and make it into sort of a little bit of their own thing. Have you come across any in your own maybe late night internet trolling, if you do any, that really spoke to you potentially, or did not speak to you?
Well, I don't do that. So I won't find them, but I'm always interested, and I don't care, because I don't think everybody has to be an amazing musician. Not everybody has to have incredible taste. It's a world for everybody, and everybody deserves to be heard. To have a platform is a privilege, and now essentially everybody has a platform.
Yeah, wow, he really doesn't troll on the internet. Otherwise, he wouldn't be saying everybody deserves to be heard.
Well,
oh no, Martin, I'll send you links. You'll change your mind. Don't worry.
I know we're getting sort of into the politics of music.
No.
I take everything at face value, and I've heard things that have been of bits of my music rather than Tull's. And they've been sort of reimagined, and I'm in awe of it, because it's almost as if it hasn't this detached from myself. So I'm listening to somebody else's music, obviously played by other musicians, and it sounds great. So for me, I'm really pleased, because I'm judging it not as my own music. It just sounds completely detached, as I said. So I'm always interested, and I'm not judgmental. There's a lot of bad music, and there's a lot of great music, and there's a lot of bad music that pretends to be great, and there's a lot of great music.
We could go down that rabbit hole all day, I think.
Whatever, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
It's everybody. It's nice that music gets a platform. It can never be a bad thing.
Right. Have you ever been approached by somebody who is covering one of your songs to play on the cover of your song?
No, no. What's the band? There's who did Cross-Eyed Mary, the really famous rock band. Def Leppard, was it? Somebody like that.
Mhm.
And I met them. They're really nice. And I said, why didn't you ask me to play on it? And they're like, oh, we didn't think you would. I said, yeah, I'd love to. But I guess that's why it is, because they think, you know, I'd be insulted. But you know, I'm up for any. I won't say I'm up for anything, but I'm up for having fun and doing something a bit different. So
Right.
you know, I don't want to be narrow-minded. Yeah, the answer is yes and no, because it's difficult to say. I have a habit of saying yes without knowing what I'm saying yes to, and
Mm.
it can backfire, because you know you get sent a piece of music that you've agreed to play on, and you really don't like it. And you know, what do you do?
Right.
You've committed yourself, so the challenge is if you don't like it, make it sound good. So
Right.
you know, it's my own fault. Fix it, and then
Right.
other things are great, and it's a pleasure to do.
So I've
Fair
got
enough.
a quick one here. Just talk about gear for another second or two here. Are you? I haven't really known you to be really a pedal player, or you use
Yeah, I
pedals at
was
all.
worried about that.
And I was wondering, are there any pedals that you are using currently right now in your rig or in the
Well,
studio
Scott,
that are really working for you?
the bad news is, Scott, because you're Scott the pedal guy.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm Martin the not pedal guy.
That's all right.
Brilliant.
I hate to ruin. Well, I thought it was going quite well up to now, and now we realise we have nothing in common.
Oh no, we got plenty in common. Trust me.
I'm teasing. No, I don't. I think because it's a commitment, and it's when you know everybody used wang bars in the, was it the 90s or the 80s, and I was guilty of that, and I suddenly realised that I was stuck with it. You know, so well, I still use it, a little bit of a shimmer, but if you use it as in a musical,
Mhm.
you use it as part of the musical interpretation,
Right.
that then every time you play that piece of music, you're going to need it. And I quite like the thought that the gear doesn't interfere with the music. The music just speaks for itself,
Right.
and it's just simple, direct. So and the same reason that I don't put. I have an engineer that I work with on my solo records, and he loves the wah wah pedal, and you know, I mean, he sits there for hours and hours on end, listening to me. So that's a pretty rotten job. I feel quite sorry for him. So once per album, I let him. I say, "Come on, James, I'll get the wah wah pedal out." And of course, he said, "I hate them, so you're going to have to do the pedal." So I'll do a solo, and he'll do the pedal. But I still don't like it. But I just do it for him, keep him, because he's a nice guy.
All right, that's fair enough.
Oh, goodness.
That went in a different direction, didn't it?
Slightly.
I like it though. That's good. Look, I mean, everybody's got a different walk of life, right? And I think that's awesome.
Well, I think also in the very early days, the high watts didn't overdrive, and I had this very nasty treble boost thing. It probably cost $10 and had 50 cents worth of parts in it, but it boosted the signal to get a bit of sustain. So I was glued to this pedal. You know, I had a lot of them because they kept falling apart. But they had a bad habit of picking up radio stations
Ooh, yeah.
really really well, or badly for me, but well for them. So and a lot of the gigs we used to do in the 70s were in these auditoriums, and a lot of them had radio masts on top of
Oh no.
the roof. So I was paranoid about radio masts. So, it's like Frank Zappa looking for the helicopters. On the way to the gig, I'd have my head out the taxi window looking for radio masts. And if there was one near the gig, I'd go, no. And it'd come through the amp so loud. So it sort of turned me away from pedals. As soon as I got the Marshalls and I didn't need it.
Just like Spinal Tap.
Yeah, sorry, it's getting worse.
Oh,
Sold any pedals, have I?
That's
funny. If I was selling pedals,
so
I wouldn't have many sales.
Well, no, it's just what I do. But so I guess I would go down that road a little further and say that you're not really a fan of amp modeling. Then I would assume, right? Have you?
Amp modeling?
Yeah.
I've never tried it. I've seen people use them.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not me. I mean, I wouldn't close the door, and but I think that the only good thing about them is the transportability, because we fly to South America to do a tour, and I take one Soldano, and if that gets smashed on an airline or goes missing, I've got nothing. But
right.
With maybe a modeling pedal, you can carry it, hand luggage. That would appeal to me. But I was on the point of trying one out, at home and just seeing what happened, because I hear that they work well. So I'm that they don't excite me, because I'm quite a purist. But as I said earlier, I'm not narrow-minded that I want to close the door completely.
Well, I have to say that as the only keyboard player in this trio, I'm very happy that you are a purist, because I've always had a beef with guitarists that have huge rigs, because they always just intend on it becoming all about that. So but I did want to ask you, one of the things that I found in my journey listening to your music has been that you're one of the most unpretentious, accomplished, badass artists out there. No. And what I mean, that is a compliment, believe it.
Okay.
What I mean by that is there are other groups who I will not name, who I love very much. But every time I listen to them, there's this air of pretentiousness that comes through. And then I was thinking about this the other day when we were prepping for the interview, and I thought, what's interesting is there's not this huge, he doesn't have this huge, ginormous, overly complex beast that has to be rigged up. And so I'm wondering, does that have anything to do with the lack of pretentiousness?
I mean, maybe. I don't know. It's just a bit.
Or is it just because you're such a nice guy?
I appreciate what you're saying, and I don't have any, but mainly because I've met too many people who have that very element that you're talking about. I can't stand them. And I've met some great players that I admire, and I wish I'd never met them, because I actually don't like them as people. And that's normal. I mean, you don't like everybody you meet, and
I try not to meet as many people as I can for that reason.
Yeah, well, it's a real disappointment. Yeah, and once I've met somebody who has that real attitude, that ego, I don't like their music either after I've experienced it. So I try to avoid musicians as much as I can. But the guitar rigs, I don't think so, because I've got a friend, a French guitar player that I work with, and he's such a great person. I mean, I love him to bits. He's a heavy metal merchant, and he's an amazing player, totally in a different genre to me. We're like chalk and cheese. but we have a great respect for each other. And he has a pedal board that takes 2 people to lift.
Right.
Good
Yes.
God.
It is ridiculous. It's faintly, and when they're all on, the noise coming out the amp is like a Boeing 747 on takeoff. It's just like this hiss, and it's like horrendous noise. But that's it's become part of his music. That's the danger, that it's become too important. In that line of command, that as I said before, the brain, the fingers, the plectrum, the strings, the guitar, the amp, in between all of that is this monstrosity that is controlling the musician, not the other way around. So when you get to that extreme, you've got, if you took all those pedals away, it's quite disappointing what you hear, because he's a great musician, but he's let that become too much important in the line of command. So it's not an ego thing, nothing to do with ego.
I'm just gonna call him out because I'm monitoring who's watching on the phone. My good friend speaking of heavy metal and too many pedals, my good friend who is a Grammy Award-winning producer who works with Judas Priest and Black Sabbath, Mike Exeter, is watching.
Right,
he just popped on as you were saying that. Hi,
well,
Mike.
I was watching Ozzy Osbourne. There's a documentary on him. And, I know Tony Iommi from Birmingham.
He works with Tony very closely.
Yeah, I haven't seen him for a long time, but obviously, we have a connection through Tull.
Sure.
And Tony, and we're Brummies. But the documentary was brilliant. I mean, Oz is an incredibly funny, interesting personality. But the thing that really hit me in the face was Randy Rhoads. What a great guitar player he was. What a great player. And and all these different genres of music, there's a lot more beat than meets the eye.
Right.
And I've even heard some crazy, freaky, whiz kid, crazy guy playing metal guitar, and then he'll pick up and play a nice piece of Bach on a classical guitar, and you go, okay, that's a lesson I've learned.
Right.
And it's about being broad-minded and looking beyond the first impression. But I've got time for everything.
Speaking of time for everything, let's talk about what you have coming up in terms of solo stuff and other.
I thought you meant tonight. I was going to. I'm going to watch the news, get depressed.
Okay.
I've just a DVD's come out recently. I'll just show you. So this is a DVD that's recorded at the Wildey Theatre in 2019.
Oh, great.
And it was brilliant. A coincidence, but it's a lifesaver because, it's given me a lot to do this year to do the packaging and get it out on my website to sell. So it's been a lifesaver. I've been writing music. I've got probably 3 hours of music that I've got stored in my studio. And normally I'll go all the way through it. I'll throw away the bits I don't like. And the bits I like, I'll work on them, one by one, and build. And out of that will come the next CD down the line. But I don't want to do it because I just want to give it a bit of space. The last solo CD was out 2 years ago, and we haven't really toured it because this 50th anniversary tour took over everything. It was an idea to put the band together with 2 guys from Tull,
right,
girl singers, and just do this 50th anniversary tour. it's sort of sidetracked my own music,
Mhm.
and I'm beginning to miss playing it. So I want to get back to playing some of my music as well.
Sure.
And again, I said at the beginning that the whole time scale of musicians has been thrown into disarray because we've lost a year
Yeah.
of our lives, a year where we would have done this project, that project, and now we're going to have to still do those projects and do the ones we're going to do this year.
Right, of course.
So it's a mountain of stuff, and it needs managing, because I want to. There's a lot of gigs I need to play. Got a huge backlog, and they're being pushed back. That they're now being pushed back to June.
Oh goodness.
Oh yeah, well it's a disaster. Yeah, I'm now planning 2022.
Right.
That's really depressing. So, I'm really busy. I'm playing a lot of flute. I bought an alto flute. So I played flute for 55 years.
Mhm.
I played from when I was at school. So I played flute before I met Ian, and I played classical music. I mean, I had lessons and everything, but of course that sort of got sidetracked through the Tull years.
Sure.
Well, I played it occasionally, but now that sort of connection with Ian, the flute and Tull, and myself has sort of diluted and sort of gone away a bit. I'm now enjoying playing the flute, because
That's
I mean, the
great.
thing, you pick up a flute and I think about Ian and the way he played, but now I want to think about the way that I play it.
Sure.
And yeah, so I'm enjoying that. I play an hour, 2 hours every day flute,
Wow.
and then I can go to the guitar and write music or just practice. Or I'm practicing, finding some weird chords. There's always something to do with a musical instrument
Right.
that is infinite, and I love discovering. If I can discover one thing each day that I didn't know, I'm happy.
Amazing.
That's good.
Now that is great advice for people in the middle of the pandemic who are musicians. Discover one thing every day that you didn't know on the instrument, or pick up a new instrument.
Yeah, and it never diminishes. I'm astounded at how amazing music is, and what it can do for you, and what you can do for yourself, and for your mind and your body.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Yes.
That's great.
Well, Martin Barre, it has been a pleasure. Unless Scott has another question.
No, he's not talking to me.
Oh no, yeah, right.
They use pedals.
You don't use pedals, Martin. We can't be friends.
He's not my friend, apparently.
I say, look, whatever works for you. I
floats your boat,
judge on those things, because it's your voice, it's your six strings. So whatever or in Miko's case, it's her 88 keys.
Sometimes my 37.
You always have, or Carlos there, your guitar. So I say, go for it. And it's been a real pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I love my guitars. I love my amps. I take a real pleasure in everything about music, whether it's writing, playing, buying a guitar, looking after a guitar, looking at guitars. I mean, there's just, it's a wonderful hobby, and it's a wonderful lifestyle. And if you can make it a profession, you're a lucky person.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. And great words to end our podcast with. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us on season 2, episode 1 of The Gear You Hear. Stay tuned. We will be back in 2 weeks, because we do the podcast every other Wednesday. Martin Barre, thank you so very much for being our first esteemed guest of 2021. We wish you all the best, and thank you so much for all your time.
Oh, we've been very nice. Been very gentle.
We try. We will be
Very
posting up Martin's links so that you can go and visit his website and learn all
Mm.
about his current and future projects coming up. So please check back as soon as the broadcast has ended. The links will go up. And if we have questions that come in, Martin, may we send them to your manager so that you may answer them?
Yes, I'd be delighted to do that.
Great.
Yeah.
We usually have people coming after the fact thinking about it and then saying, oh, I should have asked this earlier, but, and then they do. So
No, I'd be happy to do that.
okay, great.
Excellent.
You heard it here, folks. So anyway, thank you so much for your time, Martin. It was a pleasure to talk to you. And everybody else, thank you so much for tuning into The Gear You Hear. We will see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.